We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It is Tuesday. We've started yet another week. It is an absolute shit show, as it is every week. That's the one thing you don't have to sit down here on Monday and go, God, what will we talk about? There's plenty to talk about, and so that we can get a better feel for what's actually going on. Eric is joining us. Eric from Iowa, the Analytical Iowan. You can get him on YouTube and TikTok and other places. Eric, thanks for joining us today. There's so much silly shit. I mean, I did a TikTok today, and I started it out by saying, well, there are 0 days since Donald Trump last embarrassed himself and all of the country. And every day he does something. Sometimes it's multiple things. It's like I'm watching a child run amok.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Well, thanks for having me. I love being here on the podcast. But it's like dealing with a toddler who has all of the levers of power, and he embarrasses us and himself routinely. Well, you would think he embarrasses himself, but in his mind, everything he does is brilliant, everything he does is great. So it's not embarrassing to him. And the people around him he's got nothing but loyalists around him. So they pat him on the back saying, "Good job, Donnie." And it's just ridiculous.
It is. And I wanted to bring something up. If you listen to Eric on the Rational Boomer podcast, and a lot of people do, and you say, I really like Eric. I wish I could get more of him. Or if today is the first day you've heard him and say, yeah, I like this guy. You have a podcast now. You have a podcast where people can hear
Yes.
your insights every fucking day, like some other clown who comes every day.
Yes. About a week ago, I launched the Analytical Iowan podcast, doing a daily show. Um, Not quite as polished and refined as your show, and also not as dedicated for release time, but I'm trying to get it up by early morning, mid morning at the absolute latest every day. Still doing a daily show. And you can catch a deeper dive into some of the stuff because when you do short videos on TikTok and YouTube and stuff, sometimes 3 minutes even isn't enough time, but people lose interest if they're not looking for a longer video. So did that other option. So if you want a deeper dive with some of the stuff I talk about, check out that podcast.
And where can they find it?
Uh, the two places you can find the podcast right now are YouTube and Spotify. Video version on YouTube, audio on Spotify, and eventually I might get it breached out and onto other places as well.
Yep, that sounds good. And, for me, every day I go through the news on different applications, different platforms, trying to gather information, trying to get an idea what I want to talk about. I'm almost at the point where I could just get up in the morning and listen to yours and figure out what you're talking about and then give my take on it. That might make it easier. And trust me, I'm a lazy bastard, so that may happen.
Well, thank you. But yeah, I mean, I do the same thing, looking at all of the news. Um, and everybody has different takes and different opinions and different viewpoints. And, I even use some of the other big creators like, Aaron Parnas or Harry Sisson and those people just to get an idea of what's going on. Because sometimes they can at least point me in the direction of what I need to talk about or should talk about because it's an important story. So, don't just focus on one person. There's a lot of different viewpoints and a lot of good creators out there.
Absolutely. And, people like Aaron Parnas and Harry Sisson are good. What I like about Aaron Parnas is he doesn't give takes as much as he just gives the information. And that's all I'm really looking forward to is what's the story, what's the facts, and then I can decide what I think about it because I'm not a news guy. I'm a opinion guy, I guess. I give the news, but I also give you my slant on it as you do. So there's lots of options out there, but by all means, check with Eric, the Analytical Iowan, on Spotify and YouTube for his podcast. All right, let's talk about what's going on in this fucking world, man. I get up every day and I'll tell my wife, she'll say, what's happening with Trump today? And I'll tell her some of these stories and she'll go, no, That's not real. I go, sadly, it's fucking real. I mean, it starts out with the meme he put out. He's trying to make people believe that there was nobody going to the No Kings things, that it was just a bunch of weird people. Nothing really happened. So he goes and does a meme. It's a No Kings march. So he shows himself in the cockpit of a fighter jet, putting a crown on his head, and then dumping shit on the No Kings parade or dumping shit on all of America. There's a certain amount of accuracy to this thing because Donald Trump has done nothing but dump shit on this country. Now, because he's taking off Top Gun, he's playing the song Danger Zone. Kenny Loggins, who wrote and performed that song, came out today and said, listen, man, you got no business using my music on your bullshit. Even if you would have asked me, I would have denied you. Nobody wants to be part of what Donald Trump is doing and dividing the country and have their music assigned or in line with it. He said, you must take that music off immediately. Who would have ever thought you needed permission to use somebody's fucking art in your bullshit?
Yeah, I mean that's one. It's only common sense that you can't repurpose music like that. But Donald Trump doesn't care. He strictly does not care. He is, the whole point of No Kings was that we don't want a king. We've never had a king, not since we formed our own country after the American Revolution. And we don't like the fact that Donald Trump is trying to do things by divine or royal decree, however you want to look at it, because some of his followers think of him as some kind of a divine being. And we don't like that. He is a president, not a king, not a dictator or something. Um, but he just thinks he should be able to do whatever he wants. If he signs an executive order, that should be the end of it. If he tells Congress to do it, they should just pass it. That he doesn't have to do anything. He's lost the point of what it means to be president. Not that he entirely had it during his first term, but at least during his first term, he sat back, he let the economy kind of hum along and do things. He didn't tinker with everything. He wasn't a great president, but he didn't fuck shit up nearly this badly on a daily basis. And now he thinks that he deserves to be some kind of a king and thinks he deserves another term beyond that. I mean, he won't live to that long, but that's what he believes.
Well, I will say this though, in the first term, he fucked up a lot. He didn't cause as much damage up until a certain point, up until the end of his term. Little thing called COVID that he ignored and killed 1 million people. So, was it when he was on his way out? He fucked up pretty good.
Well, he did. And I wasn't counting COVID when I said that because, I mean, yeah, he botched the handling of it, but nobody could have entirely predicted that COVID would have happened. I mean, up until then, his first 3 years were relatively smooth, and because he left things alone. We're 10 months in, and he's fucked up the economy. I think not quite as bad as he did with COVID, but if he keeps it going at this rate, it's going to be worse than his last year with COVID.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, he hasn't fucked it up as bad as when there was COVID, but he's only 10 months in too. And at this point, he has Congress, a Republican Congress, that is complicit with him. They pushed back a little bit when he was in his first term. This promises to be far worse than anything we saw in the first term. And it's largely due to the fact that he's got a bunch of sycophants around him. He didn't have that so much in the first term, but in the second term, none of those relatively normal people, relatively reasonable people, were willing to work for him. So people think he just put in these clowns around him. He had no choice. Nobody else would be stupid enough to work for him because they all ended up fired, quitting, or indicted. Who the fuck wants that?
Exactly. And then they also saw how Donald Trump treated his own vice president and Mike Pence. They didn't want
Yeah.
to have him sick the goon squad after him, having him tear through the halls of the White House looking for him or whatever. No, he doesn't have anybody reasonable around him. Probably the closest to a reasonable person that he has is Rubio. And even Rubio's not doing enough. He's still being more of a sycophant, but that's the closest he's got. RFK's not competent. McMahon's not competent. Uh, Dr. Oz, really? Dr. Oz. Good Lord. I mean, you couldn't have written a script for this administration as a comedy and been able to sell it to any movie theater or to any movie studio, I mean. But here we are.
Yeah. You mentioned Marco Rubio, and I think a lot of people would say that if there's anybody that's relatively close to being normal in Donald Trump's administration, it would be Marco Rubio. And after what I heard today, we may have to change that because what he did was really pretty fucked up. He cut a deal with El Salvador. Now, we had some MS-13 um, prisoners of war, or just prisoners, in our country. And we had turned those people into spies for our country. They were benefiting us with information. Well, of course, El Salvador doesn't like us having spies. And Donald Trump wanted to send uh, uh, deported criminals, as he calls them, not all criminals, to their CCOT jail. So the deal Marco Rubio cut was he took those spies of ours who were MS-13, handed them back to El Salvador, and I'm sure they're going to treat them pretty nice, in order for us to be able to have access to CCAT. Now, that is tantamount to treason. That is a problem. And as much as Marco Rubio might like to think of himself as somewhat normal, that is fucked up, and that may haunt him as time goes on.
Well, it may haunt him. And part of that will be, sure, he was just probably following orders. It was probably something Donald Trump said, do whatever it takes, make that deal happen. Get me access to that prison again. Because weren't we sending prisoners down there at one point?
Yeah, yeah. I think.
Yeah.
What's his name? What's his name was down there? The guy that
Uh,
we
Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
right. I think he was in CCOT.
Yeah. Well, and then they said, well, okay, we're not gonna accept anybody anymore till you prove, that they have been convicted. And then courts were stepping in saying, well, you can't send any prisoners down there again. Well, Donald Trump is going to ignore court orders anyway. But Donald Trump probably told Rubio, get it done, give them whatever they want, and we'll make it happen. So he did, and that's Rubio is going to end up being one of the people that have to answer for their actions after this administration is gone. Once Democrats are back in control, even before they have uh, the presidency, they'll have the House of Representatives. I am fairly confident that they are going to have the House, and they may take it by 40 or 50 seats. Um, and they're going to start holding investigations. They're going to be calling these people before Congress. Okay, Marco, you cut this deal for these MS-13 gang members that were working for the U.S. government. Why'd you send them back to El Salvador? What happened to them after you sent them back? Oh, they're no longer alive. Well, didn't you see that coming? Why'd you cut that deal? Oh, Donald Trump told you to do that. Well, what did Donald Trump get out of it? They're going to be hitting them with hard questions, and they're going to be hard pressed to answer anything. I mean, they're going to probably try to go, "Well, I was just following orders."
I think it's a foregone conclusion that Democrats will take over the House, which will be life-saving to this country should that happen. I think you and I both talked about the prospect of the Democrats winning the Senate. Now, there was a time when people were saying, "Oh, that's not going to happen. It's never going to happen because of history and because of this and because of that." I think you and I are both looking that like that as a different possibility. I'm not going to predict they're going to win the Senate, but I think there's a real possibility they do. And if the Democrats win the House and the Senate, a lot of people on the Republican side said that's the end of the Trump presidency. Maybe not actually, but in terms of him being able to do anything, he'll be shut down. He'll be impeached. he'll be in so tied up in bullshit that the Democrats wrap him up in, he won't be able to do a fucking thing.
Yeah, you're right. And I agree with you. It's going to be a possibility for the Democrats to take the Senate. Now, it's an uphill fight. They have to pick up 4 seats in an unfavorable map. But you have places like here in Iowa where Joni Ernst decided not to run again because she didn't want to lose. So she gets to bow out gracefully, I guess. Well, now you don't have an incumbent. There is a good chance that Iowa may send a Democratic senator to Washington. There's a pickup. You've got looks like they're running what Ken Paxton, I think, is the front runner in Texas. Well, he's a dumb fuck. There's a chance, that he may end up losing because he's not well liked.
Well, and
Um,
he's
you
and
know,
he's
if
running against this Telerico guy, this young guy
right,
from Texas who's very religious, but people just love. And I've seen him, and he's a great candidate. He's a very popular candidate, not only in Texas but around the country. And he's going against a verifiable fucking criminal who's a goofball in the first place. This is a dream matchup for a Democrat at this point. So he could very potentially turn one of those Republican senators in Texas to blue. It's possible.
exactly. And if they pick up 4, now I'm going to say they have to get 4 because right now it is a 53-47 split in the Senate. And if they only pick up 3, that makes it 50-50, but JD Vance would be the tie-breaking vote. So Republicans would maintain control. They have to get 4 to get the Senate. And if they do, again, it's possible that they do. Um, Donald Trump wouldn't get any more picks through for anything. None of his crazy picks would ever get confirmed. Republicans now can pass most of his picks with a 51 vote majority if they all agree. Problem is, some of those aren't getting through. But Democrats would never put forward any of his picks. If he wanted to try to, you know, move RFK Jr. to some other position, he would never get RFK through a Democratic controlled Senate. It is very important that we put in a lot of work and try to get the Democrats the Senate. I think the House may be a foregone conclusion, but if he loses both, his term as being an well, not even an effective president, as being able to accomplish anything as president will be done because the Democrats won't do anything beyond bare bones passing CRs to keep the lights on.
Yeah. One place they have to hold the line too is in Georgia. John Ossoff is running for reelection in Georgia, kind of a red, maybe purple state. And the people he's running against are just fucking ridiculous. John Ossoff is a very impressive guy. He might even at some point be a presidential candidate. Just to give you how it's going in Georgia, Ossoff raised more than $12 million from July through September. He disclosed that on Wednesday. Now, GOP Representative Mike Collins, who's a Trump humping piece of shit that we've seen on TV many times, he's raised $1.7 million in that same period. While ex football coach Derek Dooley, we know how football coaches do in Congress, he raised $1.87 million. And then there's this fucking goofball, Buddy Carter. He raised $939,579. So it's not even close in terms of fundraising. And John Ossoff is doing an impressive job, and he is a true professional. Republicans are running a bunch of goofballs against people that are serious candidates. So I think John Ossoff shouldn't have a problem holding his Senate seat going forward.
Well, at least for this election, you wouldn't know. There's no way to even predict what would happen in 30. What would it be? 32 when he'd be up for reelection again. But
Yeah.
yeah, they're running goofballs at this point. And some of the people who were serious about potentially running or who might have been legitimate challengers said no, like Brian Kemp. He might have had a chance at picking up the seat, but he's like, I don't want to do it because I don't want to be connected, even being in the Senate, to Donald Trump. At least that's my take on it.
No, I
is
agree.
he wanted to step away from the politics scene. Go ahead.
Well, we've seen this before when George H.W. Bush was president. He was one of the more popular presidents at first, and then with the financial issues toward the end, he became woefully unpopular. Now, prior to that, no major Republican um, was willing to run. No Democrat was willing to run against George H.W. Bush because it's a stigma. Once you've lost a presidential election, you probably aren't going to get another chance. And they didn't want to blow their wad, so they all stepped back. And then at the last minute, when things went to shit for George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, out of nowhere, governor of fucking Arkansas, comes in and wins the election. So it's the same kind of thing now. Except that anybody that runs now under the Republican Party is going to be connected to Donald Trump. And I think people are seeing the writing on the wall that this is going to go down in flames, be a pile of shit, and anybody connected to it is going to be ruined going forward. So I think a lot of people are stepping back, going saying, "Let's ride this out and see what happens. I don't need to go and get my ass kicked and then have my career done."
Yeah, I think you might be right there. I said I don't think the Republicans are going to have a valid candidate or a good candidate for 28. Their best bet might be running JD Vance if he wants to run. Now, there's no assumption that he's going to run because depending on how bad this administration goes, he may say, fuck it, I don't want to do it. Even though I think the latest poll I saw had him leading, followed up by Don Jr. And they may try
Like
to
I
to
said, no
run
serious
Don Jr.
candidates.
or Eric Trump. Right. They're not going to be able to run anybody halfway decent um, because they're not going to want to run because they don't want to have to defend everything that Donald Trump and this current administration has done in the 28 election. So no, they're not running, and I think that's part of why you're getting a handful of iffy candidates for some of these statewide races, like the people running in Georgia against Ossoff. They're not getting good candidates because they don't want to have to try to defend what Donald Trump is doing right now. They want to go in when there's a Democrat in office, when they can go back to their typical play is, oh, the Democrats have fucked everything up. This country's going in the wrong direction. You need to vote us back in. And people go, oh, yeah, it would be nice to have a change again. Maybe we need to try the Republicans again. They'll fix it this time.
You know, I hope against hope that Donald Trump Jr. does run at least in the primaries because he will get absolutely decimated. He isn't the Teflon guy that his dad is, and his track record and his history is horrific. There are so many embarrassing things about him, probably things we don't even know yet. So we would be exposed to all the fucked up shit that dumbass has done. So I hope he does run in the primary. And it wouldn't surprise me if he does, because these motherfuckers don't understand when they're going to get broadsided. I love that when they get broadsided. Oh my God, I can't believe they talked about my poor history. Um, you said John Ossoff running in 32. Theoretically, John Ossoff could run in 28 too, and he might be a viable candidate. He's a sharp, articulate guy. He will have been a senator reelected for a second time, um, and um, and he's 2 years into his Senate seat. He could run for the presidency too.
Well, yeah, when I was meant by running in 32, though, wasn't running for the presidency. I was talking about him just running for a third Senate term.
Oh, okay.
That
Yeah,
would
yeah,
be
you're
that
right.
would be his next reelection. But no, he could potentially be a candidate. And I hadn't even thought about him till earlier this year. He was giving a speech somewhere, and he just sounded really impressive. And I'm like, wait a minute, he sounds really good. Like he could be making a plan for something bigger here. And if he gets elected, especially handily in Georgia, say he wins it by, double digits, potentially, that could be the momentum he needs to get a springboard in. It's not a guarantee it's going to be Gavin Newsom on the ticket. We don't know who the top of the ticket for the Democrats is going to be. And as it gets closer, there could be a bunch of people, and maybe even somebody we hadn't thought of. You mentioned Bill Clinton came out of nowhere in
Right.
92. We could be facing a similar situation back in, '08. We didn't think, there was no way that we thought Barack Obama, when he just said he was going to make his primary, run, you didn't think he was going to win it right off the bat until he started gaining a lot of momentum. It was
We didn't
entirely
think,
unexpected.
yeah, and we didn't think Donald Trump was a serious candidate in the primary runs either, but until God knows what
That's
happened.
true.
Yeah, the thing about it is I'm willing to bet here. I don't make, well, I guess I do make predictions, but I don't do them seriously as if I know something that anybody else doesn't know. I don't. But I'm willing to bet here, based on history, Gavin Newsom will not be the nominee for the 2028 election. And the only reason I say that is because it's a lot of time. I've never seen a front runner 3 years out from the election continue to be the front runner all the way up to that time. People get enthralled with people and they go, I love that guy. He should be president. And then something else happens that may be negative to Gavin Newsom, or somebody else comes up and gets more attention than he is closer to the election. I'm betting that Gavin Newsom, while I think he could be a good nominee right now, he won't be because he's peaking too early.
Yeah, you're probably right. And I'm going to counter you just slightly. There was
Okay.
one person who was the front runner 3 years out, and that was Donald Trump, because the Republicans didn't have anybody else. He was
In
their
the
front
second
runner.
in the second election.
No, for 24.
16? Right, for 24. Not
Yeah.
so in 2016, but in 2024.
No,
You're
no,
you're right about
no.
that.
Yeah, when he said, after he lost in 2020, once they went down to him after, they bent the knee and brought him back into the fold instead of keep leaving him as a pariah, um, he became the front runner almost immediately for the 24 election. It was his race until he decided not to run, which he didn't do. But he's the only exception really to that rule. You don't typically have somebody this far out, 3 years, especially somebody who hasn't been in the office before, like in this case with Gavin Newsom. You're probably right. He's peaking way too early. It could be somebody we haven't thought of, and who knows? You know, a lot happens between here and 2028. And we're making predictions assuming Donald Trump is going to be still president in 2028. Whoever ends up running may have to be somebody who can beat JD Vance, which is probably going to be easy or easier,
Yeah.
but that's an entirely different fight than trying to go up against the record of Donald Trump, especially if, say, JD Vance takes over in 2 years or a year, and he has 2 years of his own term where he changes how things operate. It is way too early to be making major serious predictions and say definitively who's going to be the front runner for the Democrats.
Yeah. We should talk about this because you get this question all the time, or this comment. I get it all the time. We answer it the same way, but I think people just want to get caught up in their woe and misery. People who say, well, yeah, Donald Trump probably won't make it through the term. He's not looking good. He looks worse every day. Um, but J.D. Vance is far worse than Donald Trump. Now, theoretically, ideologically, he is probably worse than Donald Trump because he might be a little more cognitive, maybe a little smarter. That's not saying much. I personally don't think J.D. Vance would be worse than Donald Trump. He wouldn't be good, but I think it would be a chance to catch a breath if J.D. Vance was the president. Maybe you can explain why we both believe that.
Well, a couple things. One, JD Vance doesn't have the MAGA base behind him at
Right.
all. Not like Donald Trump. Donald Trump has that 30 to 35% of the Republican Party that will vote in lockstep with whatever Donald Trump dictates. JD Vance doesn't have that. So members of Congress are going, oh, well, if we piss off JD Vance, he can't sick that MAGA base against us or tell them not to vote with us. We might have a chance of getting them to vote our way. That changes things. He also doesn't have the same sway over Congress because whatever Donald Trump seems to have over them is something that JD Vance can't emulate. So both of those things change. And also, JD Vance isn't, apparently suffering from dementia like Donald Trump. He's not going to have the 2 a.m. true social tweets and posts, ranting and raving. He's not going to be deciding things on a whim. While he may be uh, evil in his own right, he at least is smarter than Donald Trump. He will listen to advisors. He doesn't believe that he's the smartest person in the room like Donald Trump. And he won't be flip-flopping on every issue. He might actually make decisions and stick with them about certain things and not go, well, I'm going to side with you this time, but if the other side gives me some good compliments, I'm going to go with them next time.
Yeah.
That's how Donald Trump is. JD Vance won't that way.
Well, and Congress, for whatever reason, is terrified of Donald Trump. Nobody's terrified of J.D. Vance. He's weak. He's easily manipulated like Donald Trump, but the only difference is he won't go off half-cocked and do something crazy without asking anybody. He'll be controlled. And at that point, once they're done with Donald Trump, after he's left this country the way it is, they're going to try to settle him down and say, listen, let's try to fucking level the playing field here. Let's try to settle the ship down so we can hopefully go on into an election and have a fucking prayer. Because at this point, they don't have a prayer with Donald Trump and the way he's running things. I think the Republicans would see it as a relief and maybe a chance to, it won't work, but a chance to try to redeem themselves after Donald Trump has essentially destroyed the party and at least halfway to destroying the country. They're going to try to fix things. Unfortunately, he won't be the right person to do it because he makes dumb decisions. And the reason J.D. Vance would be a good nominee in 2028, say Donald Trump choked on a Big Mac tomorrow, he's got 3 years to fuck up, and there'll be plenty of fucks ups. I mean, you need a special kind of president to pull us out of what we're in now. He can't do that. He wouldn't do that. So he's going to take
No.
the heat for everything that Donald Trump did after he takes over. So I'm not worried about JD Vance at all. It'll be embarrassing, it'll be stupid, but it won't be as embarrassing and as stupid as with Donald Trump.
No, you're right there. The only way he doesn't take a lot of heat for everything that goes wrong is if Donald Trump chokes on that Big Mac, say October of 28, like a month before the election.
Yeah.
He's thrust
Yeah.
into it right before the end. Something like that. Maybe he doesn't take as much heat because we realize he's the sitting vice president. He doesn't have any real power. He can't do
Yeah.
much. But if he gets thrown in now, he's not the type of person that can fix this. It's going to take almost a once in a generation type politician and a leader to be able to right this ship in a short amount of time. And JD Vance isn't that leader, not by a long shot. And you talked about, Republicans trying to settle him down. Well, you and I have talked about there may come a point when Republicans decide, hey, we got to break from Donald Trump. We got to throw his ass out. Maybe
Yeah.
they impeach and remove him. We've talked about that a lot. Well, if you're JD Vance, no, trust me, I wouldn't want to be JD Vance, but not by a long shot. But if you're JD Vance and your party comes to you and says, hey, look, you got to be the face of our party going forward to 28. We can't deal with this crazy bullshit anymore. You got to tone it down. We're going to impeach and remove him. In the back of your head, the one thing that is going to go through your mind is we've never even removed a president before. They just got that guy, and my own party did it to him. You
Right.
know, I could be next, and you are going to be walking a fine line there. I think where you're not willing to step out and branch out and go too far crazy. He won't go down if he does become president ahead of the winning of the next election, whoever that would be. He's going to probably go down as an in effect president, but he still won't go down as the worst because that honor is still going to belong to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I talked about this before, and it may be a reach. But they could also set him up in this process too. Say Donald Trump goes by the wayside, J.D. Vance becomes president. Now he's got to pick a vice president. If Republicans are successful in manipulating J.D.
Yeah.
Vance of getting a reasonable human being, at least by their standards, as the VP. It would be easy enough for them to be done with Donald Trump, put a reasonable guy in as VP who the Republicans like, and then impeach JD Vance too. It sounds crazy, but look at where we are now. The desperate times call for desperate net measures.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy to think about that they could do that. But I mean, it would almost make sense. You bring in a Brian Kemp, you bring in
Right.
a Chris Christie, and Chris Christie has his own issues. But compared to J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, Chris Christie would be a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
There may be a few others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head who wouldn't be bad picks necessarily. Um, Here's the problem. Unless the Republicans absolutely dominate in the midterms, which I don't see happening, they're going to
No.
need Democrats to successfully pull off an impeachment of Donald Trump, and they're going to need Democrats to successfully pull off an impeachment of JD Vance. And I think I mentioned it the last time we talked about this. They could try to do this and say, "Oh, well, we'll pick Brian Kemp as being the new VP or whoever." And then they go, okay, well, we're going to try to get rid of Vance. If they don't have something solid and where public sentiment is against Vance, and they're just trying to do it to set themselves up to win in 28, Democrats won't bail them out and set them up for success. I just don't see it happening. But if they have something serious and something strong enough, Democrats may be left with no choice but to get rid of JD Vance and help them pull off that idea.
Now, there might be some people out there saying, oh, they would never do that. They would never save a Republican. Oh, yeah? How about Kevin McCarthy and Mike Johnson? They saved Kevin McCarthy at least once because they knew it was
Yes.
working against the Republicans' um, wants and needs at the time. So Democrats are all about playing that fucking game if they have to. And what I suggested was bringing somebody in reasonable so they could have like the last year or 2 years with somebody normal and trying to redeem the Republican Party. But what you're saying is absolutely right. If the Democrats felt that they were trying to do something to improve their lot, they would say, no, you pick JD Vance. You're stuck with that motherfucker and let him run this shit show up until 2028 so we can kick his ass easily when we get to the election.
Yeah, unless, of course, like I said, it is a serious enough offense. I mean, if JD Vance had done half of what Donald Trump has done so far, Democrats may have no choice but to say,
Yeah.
"Okay, motherfucker, we see what you're doing. We see what you Republicans are pulling off here, but you know, we can't defend saving him in the general election when we go to get reelected. We can't defend it, so we have to vote against him." Um, but the whole thing is that means Republicans would be scheming, and there are some, but a lot of their great strategists, they're getting old.
Yeah. Very old.
They're glitching out, they're falling over. It doesn't seem like they have as many good strategists as they used to.
Now let me ask you that. Let me ask you this. In terms of say J.D. Vance as president, now people will say you're talking about hypotheticals. Not really, because Donald Trump really doesn't look good, and he fucks up more and more every day. He's putting a lot of pressure on the Republican Party. If J.D. Vance picks a vice presidential candidate, a nominee, does that have to go through Congress too, with help or
Yes.
with help of the Democratic Party? So Democrats could have some bearing on who ended up being vice president.
Yes, it takes two-thirds of both houses of Congress, the House and the Senate, to end up confirming a new uh, VP. And it's only ever happened once, I believe, and that was Gerald Ford. But
Right.
Gerald Ford was considered relatively normal. And both parties had no problem with Gerald Ford. He was, middle
Pretty
of the road,
benign.
moderate, didn't make any waves. Yeah, and that's who the Republicans would have to put forward. They would have to bring somebody that could get Democratic support. See Jordan. You're not going to see Mike Lee out of Utah.
Yeah.
Um, probably not a Lauren Boebert by any stretch of the imaginations. Democrats wouldn't get behind her. They'd be like, that person has no business being the sitting vice president. And because they would get a say, that would make a difference. Now, again, this goes back to we were talking about the midterms. It depends how the midterms shake out. And I don't think it would happen. But if by some fluke Republicans pick up a shit ton of seats in both houses and they end up with 67% of both houses, they could put in whoever they wanted. Again, I don't think it would happen, but that's just how the math would shake out.
Well, and think about it this way. Think about it this way too. Again, here's a hypothetical. Say it's after the 2026 election, okay? And Democrats win the House and the Senate, okay? They got to elect or a nominee for vice president and just say that they can't come up with the vice presidential candidate in enough time. Something happens to JD Vance, guess what? Democrat becomes president because that'd be the one time
Yes.
when the Speaker of the House would take the job as the president. He wouldn't take the
Yes.
job as the VP.
The way
He wouldn't take the job as the VP if it was vacant. But if something happened to JD Vance when he was president and there was no VP, that's the Speaker of the House.
Yes, unless we're assuming it would be Hakeem Jeffries, and as far as I know, there is nothing that would prevent Hakeem Jeffries from becoming president. Like he would be eligible,
Right.
unless somebody is ineligible at speaker. Then it goes down the line. Starts moving past that person. It would become the president pro tem Senate. It would go beyond that. Down the line at every step, they go, okay, is this person eligible? Do they meet the requirements? Yes or no? But yeah, Republicans could end up removing Donald Trump. And on the off chance something stupid happens to JD Vance, say he really screws up and they have to impeach him, and even Republicans are on board to remove Vance for whatever reason. If there is no sitting vice president, the speaker would become president, and that would be, if the Democrats take the House, a Democrat. And what else are you going to do? I mean, what else would happen is nothing. A Democrat would be president. I don't know that the Republicans would go that route if there wasn't a sitting vice president to take Vance's spot, unless it was that egregious that they didn't have a choice, or if it was something foreseen like unknown health issue or something, and he ends up just not making it himself. But that seems less likely than it would be with Donald Trump.
Well, the bad news is if Hakeem Jeffries couldn't take the presidency, that would go to the Senate pro tem, who happens to be your best buddy, Chuck Grassley, currently. So we don't want to see that fucking happen. It's hard to imagine Chuck Grassley would last longer than Donald Trump, but at this point, they don't have two brain cells between them. But Grassley at least is ambulatory at this stage and probably will outlive Donald Trump.
You know, I would honestly like to see it. I mean, not that I would vote for him in 2028 when he is up for re-election, but honestly, if he outlives Donald Trump and makes it to 28, I will at least be happy to see his name on the ballot.
Yeah, well, the thing about it is he has some things going for him. Chuck Grassley would be running for president, and he would be the only president in recent history that also attended the Gettysburg Address. So he has that going for him. That fucker's so old. Let's talk about something that's going on right now that is a little troubling. We all hear and see what Donald Trump is doing. And there are people who are saying, well, at least the judicial system is kind of holding the line a little bit, putting up some guardrails for Donald Trump. He's failing at most of these court cases. However, we know that he wants to send the National Guard into Portland, and he's been shunned from doing that by the courts. Now, there was an appellate court just yesterday that said he can deploy National Guard into Portland, I mean, what the fuck is up with that? Are we losing the judicial branch too?
No, I haven't seen what the court case yet, so I don't know what their ruling was about. I'll have to look into that. But I don't know that we're losing it. Again, what had happened with the Portland case the first time, the judge had looked at the LA ruling because it's the same Circuit Court of Appeals and said, okay, well, you had these problems with the ruling from LA. So they tried to fix their ruling and how they limited things. And now apparently there's other issues. So they need to go back. The lower court will look at it again, probably try to issue an injunction, wording it different, relying on different things, trying to fix the issues. Ultimately, this is going to end up in front of the Supreme Court. And I
Yeah.
don't know what this Supreme Court will do about allowing Donald Trump to just willy-nilly send in the National Guard to do what he calls peacekeeping when there's no thing going on, when they're not requested by the um, governor, they're not requested by the mayor or anything, just because Donald Trump believes there's problems.
Well, just to bring you up to speed here and to bring me up to speed too, here's a story in the Huffington Post about that case. It says a panel of Ninth Circuit judges has backed President Donald Trump's efforts to deploy National Guard troops in Portland, Oregon, lifting a prior court order blocking the move. The decision, which advanced 2-1, could enable Trump to eventually send troops to the city, even as Portland Mayor Keith Wilson and Governor Tina Kotek have stressed they're not needed. Now, a second temporary restraining order, however, still remains in effect. Um, that means that any troop deployment could remain on hold until that too is lifted. So, while it's a negative decision in that case, that doesn't mean the National Guard is going to be deployed as yet. There's still some steps they have to take to make that happen. But you got to wonder. I saw a news person on one of the streaming news sources says, "What's what would these judges see that suggested there'd be a reason to deploy the National Guard? I mean, we know what's going on in Portland. Nothing. How can this court sit there and say, yeah, go ahead and do it, whether or not he's able to do it right now or not? I don't even know how that decision can be made.
Well, the thing is, and this is where I'm going to defend this decision just slightly, is they're
You
not
son of a
looking at
bitch.
what's actively going on in Portland. No, they're looking at what's going on in the law. And does Donald Trump have the authority to do this? They don't necessarily care about what's actually going on in Portland. I mean, Donald Trump could be correct in saying that Portland was on fire and burning to the ground and, an active trouble. And if the law went the other way, they'd say, well, no, you can't send the National Guard. That's what they're looking at. But as far as it goes, now I didn't know it was only a 2-1 decision. That means it was only a three judge panel. I believe they can appeal it to the full panel of the Ninth or 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, I think it is.
Ninth.
And whichever ninth, okay, they'll be appeal it to the Ninth Circuit to the full panel, which is I think it's 7 judges, and they will all hear. So when they get the other 4 involved, that may switch how
Yeah.
this case. It's not over yet. This isn't the final ruling, and like I said, it's going to end up in front of the Supreme Court. This is more about, does Donald Trump have the authority to send the guard in at all, not about what's actively going on and whether he's right in his justification.
And where the slippery slope here is, does he have the authority to send the National Guard in to a city? Yes, he does. He does have that authority. Does there have to be some validation for him to do that? Is there some criteria that says, yes, he can send it in under these terms, or no, he can't send them in unless they have these terms? And I guess that's where the argument is here. Does he have the authority? Yeah, he does have the authority, but is it justified in this particular situation?
Right. That's what they're looking at is, Do the laws that exist governing when he can use the National Guard and not, do they apply? Is there limits? That's what they're looking at, not necessarily about what is actively going on in Portland. You know, and they may be looking at it a little bit saying, okay, well, here are the 12 criteria or however many criteria it are that he has to meet. Does he meet at least enough of them to say yes? And then they're looking at the situation. But first, they have to figure out if he has the authority to send them in and under what reasons. And this has never been tried before. This is all first of its kind proceedings, really, because we've never had a president trying to send in the National Guard as some kind of peacekeeper or directive like this when there wasn't something going on. Yes, I know during the civil rights movement, they sent the National Guard in to make sure like students could go to school because they were keeping the peace there. But that was entirely different. They had some justification for it. Donald Trump seems to be doing this on a whim.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean that's what Donald Trump does. He just pulls shit out of his ass and hopes that it sticks against the wall. And so people think there's some strategy. People think there's some plan with what Donald Trump does. He's very reactionary. He's very emotional. And when he sees something, he just says something. I'll give you a good example. We've got Donald Trump bombing boats in the ocean off Venezuela. The president of Colombia came out and called Donald Trump a murderer, called him a murderer. And the reason he called him a murderer is because he had proof that one of the people that were killed in these boats that Donald Trump blew up was actually an innocent fisherman who had trouble with his engine. So Donald Trump, through these directives to bomb these boats, killed this innocent man. And the president of Colombia said he was a murderer. So what does Donald Trump do when he hears that? He gets all butthurt and he says, okay, well, Colombia is just a drug infested country, and we're going to cut off all subsidies or any kind of funding we send to them. This is what I mean. It's just reactionary. This guy has the
Mm-hmm.
audacity to talk back to him or call him out, and he immediately has to hit him with something bigger. And that's exactly what Donald Trump does. So when it comes to Portland, he's trying to attract attention. He's just reacting. And this is why Donald Trump fucks up all the time. He doesn't think about what he's doing, and he just does it because he thinks he's a genius. And 99% of the time, he gets it shoved back in his face.
Yeah, exactly. Donald Trump doesn't think, doesn't process. Not really. If he did, he probably wouldn't have gone bankrupt 7 times.
Yeah.
Um, he just reacts. He does things. You know, he's flip-flopped on the Russia-Ukraine war multiple times. Starts out by saying, well, yeah, Russia probably is going to have to end up keeping some territory. Then he comes out a while later after having a good meeting with Zelensky, where Zelensky kissed his ass, fight like hell, and get back all of its territory. And now, after having another phone call where Putin kissed his ass and patted him on the back and tells him he's a genius, now he's back to telling Zelensky, yeah, you're probably going to have to give up some of that land, some of that property to Russia. He doesn't keep a consistent strategy, and that's where what we were talking about with JD Vance, where JD Vance would be better, at least, is he wouldn't be so reactionary and he wouldn't flip flop.
I want to expand on that last story that you told because I think there's more things that are very telling that are happening in this story. Some people suggest that Donald Trump will side with anybody that he's last talked to. And we've seen that with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin talks to him and he says, you got to do this. Then he talks to Zelensky and he says, we're going to give you Tomahawk missiles. Then he goes back and talks to Vladimir Putin and he changes his tune. Now, you suggested Vladimir Putin kissed his ass. I don't think that's the case. I think Vladimir Putin took that motherfucker to the woodshed because he's got something on Donald Trump. He's got some power over Donald Trump. It's not that Donald Trump just likes this guy, he's terrified of the guy. So he comes back to
Well,
Zelensky this time and changed it and says, You got to give up the land that they've already taken, plus some other stuff. You got to do it. And Zelensky, of course, says no. But what happens at that point? It's not on camera, but there are plenty of reports. It turns into a screaming match. Donald Trump is cussing at Zelensky, slamming things on the table. You got to do this, or Russia's going to overrun you. You're going to kill everybody in the country. You got to give Russia exactly what they want. And this turns into a screaming match. And again, apparently, Zelensky left again, like he did the first time Donald Trump and he met. This is again another example of reactionary shit. Donald Trump is telling what he presumes to be a smaller country, a weaker president, and says, you got to do it my way. And Zelensky says, fuck yourself. Now he doesn't know what to do with it. See, this is what I've always said is if you sat with Donald Trump and you were a media guy and you went against him, he'd lose his shit. He would have never been president because he couldn't control himself. And in this meeting where he got in this screaming match with Zelensky, he lost it. He can't help it. When you go against him or don't agree with him, he will lose his shit like every other fucking narcissist does. So now Donald Trump is upset because he wants peace in this country and make it look like he's done something. Zelensky's not cooperating, so now he's mad. What's he going to do now? Give Russia fucking missiles?
Well, I mean, I doubt that because I doubt he could get Congress to approve that.
Yeah.
But you're right there, and maybe Putin did threaten Donald Trump a little more, but I also think Putin is way slicker than Donald Trump by any means.
Oh
He
yeah.
probably did it with compliments and a backhanded threat, Donnie, you're smarter than this. I know you're a genius. You'd look so great if you back me. But if you didn't, I may have to let this thing out I got out of the bag. I think Putin probably used a bit of both. And Donald Trump is too stupid to realize he's getting played. I mean, he doesn't understand that. Zelensky, for his part, is doing an amazing job fighting this war against what should have been like the number two or number three superpower in the world at the time. Everybody said Russia was going to get, roll through Ukraine. Ukraine was going to be gone in a matter of a week or two. Here we are almost 4 years later, and Ukraine's still standing. And for the most part, they've, held their own. And ultimately, I think they could end up winning when Russia ends up backing off of this thing, when they realize it's unwinnable.
Yeah.
But the,
The way I know what Donald Trump said comes directly from Vladimir Putin is because Donald Trump said, listen, if you don't give up, they're just going to overrun you, which is absolute bullshit. Because if they could have done that, they would have done it by now. They're having all kinds of trouble. But that's what Vladimir Putin would say as a bully, as a narcissist. If you don't stop it, I'm going to overrun you and take over your whole country. It's bullshit, but that's the kind of things that people say. So Donald Trump got that directly from Vladimir Putin because Donald Trump said, "Really, you'll overrun him? Oh my God, I believe you because I believe everything that Vladimir Putin says." And then he goes and relays it to Zelensky, and Zelensky knows it's bullshit because he's got average or above average intelligence, which trumps fucking brain, which is way below average intelligence.
yeah, you're right. I mean, if Donald Trump had four brain cells, he'd be dangerous. But we're lucky he's only got three.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, the whole thing is he probably did get that talking point straight from Russia, and he probably does believe that they could overrun um, Ukraine. But like you said, if they were going to be able to do it, they would have done it by now. The simple fact is they are not nearly as strong or nearly as capable as they have led us to believe for so long. And one of the things that should be questioned after we get this administration out, and it should have been brought up during the Biden administration with this Russia-Ukraine war, is how did we get it so wrong? Because we've heard for how long about how strong Russia is and everything else. They have been used as a tactic to for us to keep strengthening our military and for using it to get defense authorizations through and things like that. So did we get it wrong? or were we intentionally misled so that public support would be for keep continuing to boost the military against this threat of Russia that really wasn't a threat at all?
Well, and the idea that Russia can just overrun them. This comes from the publication The Economist, came out in October of 2025. A meta estimate places total Russian casualties between 984,000 and 1.438 million people. That's the casualties. And they're talking as many as a half a million deaths. If they could overrun them and win this easily, they would have done it before losing a half a million people and a million plus casualties. If that isn't enough of an inducement to pour on the power and do everything you can, I don't know what is. So to suggest they're going to overrun Ukraine, clearly the numbers don't suggest that. They're in a fight for their lives and they're not winning this fight. They may be not losing it per se, but they're certainly not winning it.
Yeah, Ukraine's definitely holding their own. Now, part of the reason they've been able to hold their own has been because of our NATO allies and even up until Donald Trump, American support. We have given them a lot. But for those people that sit there and say, well, we shouldn't give them that kind of money, you and I have talked about it before. I'm going to bring it up again. Most of what we give them, even when it's military equipment, it's either A, stuff we've gone through our own stockpiles and said, you know what, we haven't replaced this stuff in 5, 6 years or whatever the time frame is. We're going to go buy new for ourselves. You can have our surplus. And it's a bunch
Yeah.
of surplus that we've replaced and upgraded our own equipment, or it's stuff sitting around going, yeah, we haven't these vehicles haven't, we've been maintaining them, but they haven't been used for anything in a while, whatever. That's what we're giving them. Or it is new product that is being bought from American manufacturers, and we're putting that money into the economy,
Right.
and we're, driving factories to produce things. Either way, it is beneficial to Americans. It is not this just, oh, here's a bunch of money, Ukraine, go buy it yourself, and then they turn and they buy it from somebody else. It's all about benefiting the American economy is one of the secondary reasons we're doing it. But we have poured a ton of money into Ukraine and helped prop them up. A lot of the NATO nations have done the same thing. Why? Because they know Vladimir Putin would not stop at Ukraine. He's proven that this year when he's had drones enter Polish airspace. What was it? Was it Romania had airplanes enter their airspace for a little bit, and a couple of the other countries had planes and drones entering their airspace. He was pushing the back to see how NATO would respond. He wouldn't stop at Ukraine. Next thing you know, he'd be into Poland or somebody else, and NATO would have to react with an Article 5, and we'd be into a major world war. We have to support Ukraine to prevent a world war.
Well, there's another reason we have to support Ukraine too, because we signed an agreement to do that. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
Back when Russia split up, when the Soviet Union split up and became Russia and all these other countries, Ukraine was one of the countries that split off of Russia. And when that happened, it just so happened that Soviet Union had a bunch of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So Russia and America said, "Whoa, this little country has all these nuclear weapons. We cannot have that." So Russia and the United States sat down with Ukraine and said, "Listen, you got to give up these nuclear weapons. It's just not safe for everybody to have these things. But here's the deal. You give up those nuclear weapons." Russia said, "We'll protect you." America said, "We'll protect you under all situations." So you give up the nuclear weapons, which they didn't have to do, but they did give up the weapons because America and Russia promised to protect them going on in the future. Now those nuclear weapons, you know where they went? Right back into fucking Russia. That's where they went. So even though that agreement was signed in the 90s or something, what does Russia do? Attacks them and goes to, several years ago, goes and attacks them against that agreement. and does it again here when they went into Ukraine 3, 4 years ago. Now, America was signed on that agreement. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that Russia doesn't stick to their agreements, but America generally does, especially in these kinds of cases. So when Republicans say to me, why are we even sending stuff over to a foreign country? Let's have America first. Because you've got an agreement that says you would. That agreement still is in existence, regardless of what Donald Trump or the Republicans say. We agreed to do it. We traded them our protection to get the nuclear weapons out of there. Guess what? I tell you what, if those nuclear weapons were still there, I'll guarantee you Russia wouldn't have invaded them.
Oh, I think you're 100% right. Now we're hearing things about the state of Russian nuclear weapons, that they may be in disrepair, etc. And they may not even be functional at this point. But I bet you, if Ukraine had gotten to keep those nuclear weapons, that they'd be functional at this point and they'd be a major
Yeah,
deterrent. It wouldn't be a question of will they fire? It would be a matter of Russia wouldn't have even attempted to do it because they don't want to deal with mutually assured destruction. And even if Russia were to launch a new Ukraine, there well, how Donald Trump would react in this situation. But under previous presidents, the reason they haven't is because they were always afraid that America would launch against them.
yeah,
That's one of the things with it being a deterrent. They don't want to see the outcome if they would attempt it. They only want to keep it there as a countermeasure so the other countries do it. But if Ukraine had kept their nuclear weapons, we wouldn't be sitting in this almost 4-year-old war now. The one that Donald Trump said he could end in 24 hours, mind you, that is still
yeah.
going on 10 months into his presidency.
Well, exactly, and you make a good point. I made this point one time before too. The only thing Russia has that people are concerned about is their nuclear weapons. But the question is, what condition are those nuclear weapons in? They told us that they had the strongest army in the world. They went up against little Ukraine. We found out otherwise. We found out their fucking army is pretty weak. They don't have a lot of money in this country. What money is there is being grifted by Vladimir Putin and the upper echelon oligarchs. So it's conceivable that those nuclear weapons aren't really nearly as functional as they once were. Now, we don't want to gamble on something like that. That would be a fucking crazy gamble. But would it surprise you if Vladimir Putin had a bunch of nuclear weapons that weren't worth a shit, but he was still using it as leverage? Not surprising at all.
No, that wouldn't surprise me in the least. And actually, depending, them not being less than functional or in disrepair might almost be worse. Because at least if you keep them up and keep them active, you know what their yield is, you know what their range capabilities are, and you have a good idea of them being able to hit their intended target. I mean, if they're in disrepair, like we've said, it could be, it wouldn't surprise us if it is. Um, what would happen if they're aiming for Ukraine and hit Poland or something like that? And it wasn't even a legitimate thing where they were actually trying to get Poland, just that because of them being in disrepair, it just happened. I mean, you just set off a nuclear war between NATO nations at that point. It Let's not find out what condition they're in, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're in disrepair.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately the demise of Russia in general. They've got financial issues. The people aren't happy. They're losing, or at least not gaining any ground in the Ukrainian war. Uh, they're slowly but surely being exposed for being a much weaker country than everybody thought they were. And the only reason we thought they were strong is because Putin told us that. Well, Donald Trump tells us a lot of shit, but there's a lot of lies going on. We're not going to test the nuclear weapons, but I think slowly but surely, especially with the imminent demise of Vladimir Putin, a lot of things are going to be exposed there too. And when it comes down to it, it wouldn't surprise me if Russia becomes kind of an afterthought. And they just don't have the money to continue doing what they're doing. And it costs a lot of money to obtain nuclear weapons, and there are too many people stealing the money.
Yeah, you're right. And with with a place like Russia where they have the one leader, they've got Putin, and everything is right now riding on him. I don't even know I can't remember how many years he has been in charge over in Russia at this point, but it's going on quite a while. Um,
Yeah,
when he's gone, there's going to be a power vacuum. They're going to be going through some things because you don't just replace the top of the pyramid like that very easily. Now, we do here every 4 years. We have elections. We change the president. That is an entirely different dynamic. We can get through a bad administration. We can get through, changing administrations. For them, it is an entirely different thing. And we could find out a lot of things when whoever replaces Putin comes into power. And it could change their entire ideology on how they view the rest of the world and what they do with the rest of the world. And they could become an afterthought, like you said, for several years until new leadership takes over and reasserts dominance.
yeah, absolutely. One of the things we're seeing with Donald Trump and the Trumplafucks around him, we have a bunch of incompetent people around him. They're making horrible mistakes. Even Republicans are getting upset about this. And I don't know if you heard this. This comes out of Ross' story. It says MAGA fans expressed astonishment and disgust Monday night as FBI head Kash Patel publicly celebrated Diwali, the Hindu festival of lights, celebrated each autumn by more than a billion people, including Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, and some Buddhists. In a post on X, Patel wrote, Happy Diwali, celebrating the festival of lights around the world as good triumphs over evil. This is pissing off MAGA. It caused a meltdown with MAGA. Jeremy Carl, who describes himself as being on the front lines in a war against secularism, shared Patel's post and wrote, Do you see the problem yet? Another user, John McGlone, who describes himself as an unapologetic Christian American. This is a Christian nation. Check your foreign stuff at the gate. How hard is it just to follow the fucking plan? Don't, you know, as far as I'm concerned, if an Indian expatriate wants to celebrate Diwali or any other religious holiday that isn't Christian, I don't give a shit. But you don't do that to MAGA. I mean, we thought it was funny that they even put him in that position because of his heritage, and now he's just kind of flaunting it. That's not going to fly with MAGA.
No, no, it's not. And that's the dumb thing. I guarantee you, until he made that post, a big chunk of the MAGA base that has having the problem with it had never heard of it. They had no idea what it is. But they get this idea in their head that you cannot be anything but Christian, and if you celebrate anything but Christian, somehow it takes away from them being Christian.
Right.
That it somehow it shrinks the pie or something. No, there is a place for everybody in this country to celebrate whatever they want. In fact, not far from me, I believe it is a Hindu temple. It's just outside of a small little town, and I've never actually been inside, but every time I'm driving by, you can see it plain as day from the road. It looks beautiful. I admire the architecture every time I drive by it, just because it looks so great. Doesn't affect me if people go and worship there one bit. I just like looking at the building. I think it looks neat. But MAGA and a lot of Christians have this view that if you allow them to celebrate their beliefs, somehow it weakens their belief system or something, that you're persecuting them in some way. Just like opening up and allowing gay marriage in this country. It's like you're telling them that their church has to allow it to happen. No, if it's against your religious beliefs, your denomination, your church doesn't have to do anything. it doesn't take away anything from you, but they believe it so much that they have meltdowns over stuff like this.
And it just goes to the Republican victim syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
If black people are proud of their heritage, well then that's a shot at white people. If if somebody wants to celebrate a religion that's not Christian, that's an attack on their Christianity. If somebody who's gay wants to get married, that's an attack on their heterosexuality. And I put those in quotes because it sounds like a lot of Republicans only say they're heterosexual. There's a lot of closeted motherfuckers, Mike Johnson and others. But this is how the Republicans behave. It's always an attack on them if somebody is different. And that is the epitome of bigotry and racism. That's the
Yeah.
basis for racism. You're black, I don't want you to even exist. And that's their attitude. You're gay, I don't think you should even exist. And to suggest otherwise is selling it short because that's how these people feel. I mean, there's a guy that I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if I. There's a guy named Ingracia, and he's a nominee for some position. Uh, Donald Trump is trying to appoint to a position, and it sounds like they kicked him out because he basically said Martin Luther King and celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday should be sent to the seventh gates of hell or something like that. He was totally against celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday and some other thing too. But this guy said the quiet part out loud. He's not going to get nominated now because not even the Republicans can support this dumbass. But these people just feel compelled to say the quiet part out loud. They can't help themselves.
Yeah, I saw something about that. I don't remember which senator it was. I was reading that they were he was going to have a hard time getting confirmed, and one of the Republican senators came out and said, "Yeah, I can't vote for him. I can't vote to confirm him." And it sounds like if his nomination continues, he won't have the votes to get confirmed. But you're right; they say the quiet part out all of the time. It is so bizarre that they have been so emboldened. We thought things had been progressing. No, they just got, shifted to behind the scenes. They were keeping things quiet. They had figured out how to do things in private, but then Donald Trump gets elected and he makes it okay for them to be racist again and makes it okay for them to come out and say all of this horrendous stuff. So they do. And they uh, need to be shown that no, there's no place for people that think like them in normal society and get pushed back under their rocks.
Well, I have the story here because I wanted to find it and get the specifics because it's even dumber than what I just said. This guy's name is Paul Ingracia. His background is he's a journalist, no doubt a radical right journalist. But that's who Donald Trump puts into office people in media, which is stupid. As somebody who's worked in media, these are some of the dumbest motherfuckers I've ever known in my life. That's why I do it independently now and don't work for mainstream media. But Paul, this now understand, this guy is going to be sitting in a Senate confirmation hearing scheduled for Thursday of this week. He made these remarks in a chain with a half a dozen Republican operatives and influencers, according to that chat. This is what he said. And he's a nominee to lead the office of special counsel, of all things. He told a group of fellow Republicans in a text chain that Martin Luther King Jr.'s holiday should be tossed into the seventh circle of hell. And he said he has a Nazi streak, according to the text chat viewed by Politico. A couple of things there. You want to get confirmed, and you tell people, yeah, I don't like the Martin Luther King holiday, should be tossed in the seventh circle of hell. And by the way, I guess I have a little bit of a Nazi streak. First of all, why would you say that if you're going to be in a confirmation hearing? Secondly, the most important thing here is how did something like that leak out? Isn't that interesting? How these things are continually leaking out. Even Republicans are appalled by this shit because it would have had to been a Republican that leaked this shit out.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. This administration is leakier than anything. I mean, what's the expression? Something about uh it's leakier than a boat with a screen door for a bottom or something like that. Um,
Well, I took it another way. I said it's leakier than Donald Trump's diaper on Taco Tuesday. I like that one better.
that
Anyway,
works
go
too.
ahead.
That works too. Uh, but I guarantee you, he may not get confirmed, but as public outcry grows for the comments this guy has said, you just watch, and it's gonna be interesting to see which Republicans come out with their favorite version of this talking point. And instead of saying, "Well, no, we don't stand with him, and we don't like the things he's saying," they'll come out and say, "Well, who leaked it?
Yeah,
Where's the leak coming from? We got to stop the leak." They have a bigger problem with the leak happening than with the actual comments. And there's another expression that I'm sure you and I have both used and heard. If you have 10 Nazis sitting around a table and somebody else sits down, now you have 11 Nazis sitting around that table. You
absolutely.
know, if they're willing to accept him, for saying it, and they're willing to defend him, then they don't see anything wrong with the comments he made.
You know, something you just said is probably the saddest commentary on this country, particularly the Republican Party. He suggests that Martin Luther King's holiday should be tossed into the seventh circle of hell, and I have a little bit of a Nazi streak. That's what he said in this text. It's been exposed, it's been leaked out. You said he may not get confirmed. In a real fucking world, he shouldn't even be in that confirmation meeting. But because of the Republicans who are who they are, he's going to be in that confirmation meeting. And you're absolutely right. He may not be approved. There's no way this fucking clown should be approved. And hopefully, Republicans don't need any closer ties to Nazis than they already fucking have. We're already calling them Nazis. You don't need this fucking clown to prove that.
Exactly. I mean, and prior to Donald Trump's first administration, if somebody like this had been nominated to a position, he probably never would have gotten out of committee. And if they would have had a hearing and this would have come out, the vote would have been, you know, unanimous on the committee part, bipartisan, zero to whatever, however many's on the panel. No votes to confirm, no votes to advance, done. And if it came out after it was advanced to a full Senate floor vote, it would have been like zero to or 100 against. It wouldn't have been a thought. Now, because of the way this administration acts and because of some of the people they've elected in the Republican Party, we're talking about, well, he may not get elected or he may not get confirmed. And we're talking that, it might be a may at, 48 in favor to 52 against or something like that. That is ridiculous. It is appalling. And it's a sad commentary of how far the Republican Party has gone.
Based on that analogy you said, if you've got 11 Nazis at a table and another guy comes in, that means you've got 12 Nazis at the table. I presume you would agree that if he goes up for confirmation and any Republicans that vote to confirm him, we have to presume they're Nazis too, because he's admitted to have a Nazi streak. And if you support that, then you're just as bad as far as I'm concerned.
Yep. And I would actually go one step slightly farther. And I would say anybody who votes to advance him, you know, would have a Nazi streak
Yeah.
because we can't count on all Democrats in the Senate to vote, the right way. You look at Fetterman, who may
Yeah.
potentially be leaving the Democratic Party at some point. It wouldn't, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it wouldn't surprise me if he came out and voted in favor of a clown like that.
Yeah. You know, Fetterman at this point is just mentally disabled. He's not running on all cylinders. There's something off about him. I don't know if you saw that situation where he was sitting on a park bench by himself, a U.S. senator sitting on a park bench by himself in a pair of shorts. A woman comes up and confronts him. He just bows his head and doesn't answer. doesn't say a word. She's calling him out for everything he's said and done, and he can't even muster up enough gumption to fucking answer this woman. This guy is not mentally well. He shouldn't be driving a car, let alone being a U.S. senator.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise me if he faces a primary challenge. Um,
Oh,
now
God, I
he's not
hope
up in
so.
26. He's up in 28. He may not run again, or he may try to switch parties or run as an independent or something. But I don't see him getting reelected as a Democrat. I don't think it happens.
They should run him out of there, a la Menendez. They got to be able to find some dirt on that fucker and run him out of there. It's just, as we're coming toward the end here, I want to talk about the really big issue. We don't know really what's going to happen, but we have this government shutdown. It's going on 20 days, which the last one, I think the record by Donald Trump was 34 days, and it caused all kinds
35.
of problems. 35 days, okay. And so
Yeah,
so now we're at 20 days, and there doesn't seem to be any movement. They just had an 11th vote in the Senate yesterday, as you're listening to this on Tuesday, and it didn't pass, of course. There does seem to be a little bit of movement with John Thune. Not good enough. John Thune basically said, "Listen, you open up the government, I'll guarantee you a vote on the ACA at some point in the near future. I'll guarantee you that." And he was surprised that Republicans said, "Fuck that." And the reason they said fuck that is because Republicans lie or Donald Trump will veto something. They just want to make this easy and get this passed and then blow off the ACA because they'd love to destroy the ACA, which makes no sense to me because it's going to hurt them more than it does help hurt the blue states, but it will hurt the blue states too. How do you see this thing going? Somebody's going to have to give in, and I'm very proud of the Democrats for standing strong on this. As much as it hurts, they really have to do it. And I feel like they're too deep into this now that if they gave in just to open up the government, it would hurt them worse than standing strong.
yeah. I don't know how this. I think ultimately, I think the Republicans will end up having to back down.
Yeah,
Um, but that's going to bring its own list of challenges. Because if they back down and they pass anything in the Senate that has Democratic priorities to it, of course, Donald Trump is going to want to primary any Republican that voted in favor of it, and stuff like that. Now they would almost have to pass it with a big enough margin to get around a presidential veto. But I think they
right.
back down. I think they give in. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Democrats say, hey, look, how about this? You just kick the can down the road. We'll give the Affordable Care Act subsidies. Let's go 4 years, and let's
Yeah.
put the Medicaid cuts out 4 years. Let's see what the political climate is then. Let's see who's in charge then. And if you guys are still in control, you'll get your cuts. If we're in control, we'll reverse it. But it wouldn't surprise me if that maybe ends up being where we land here. But ultimately, I think Republicans probably back down because they're not winning the messaging. They're not winning uh, the public opinion on this. And then when it goes over to the House, um, ultimately, if it passes the House, I think Mike Johnson, his days as Speaker are probably numbered
Yeah.
because the only thing saving him right now is the fact the government shut down and he's keeping the House out of business. They're not there. They're not doing anything. And that's the only thing saving him because the minute they get back and the minute he brings everything, back into full session, they have to swear in Representative Grijalva and they're going to force a vote on the Epstein files. And Donald Trump is going to be pissed when that passes the House. He's probably going to call his MAGA buddies and say, hey, get rid of Mike Johnson. He's disloyal. He didn't bury that for me. And
Well,
then they vote to
and
vacate the chair. Democrats have no reason to save him.
well, there might be one reason to save him. If they get the 218 votes and Donald Trump immediately gets Mike Johnson kicked out of there, nothing can happen in the House until you have a Speaker of the House. So that could be a play of Donald Trump. Take the Speaker out, take a couple weeks or a month to get a new speaker in there, and nothing can happen unless you have a speaker. So the idea would be to get that 218th vote and get it on the floor as quickly as possible before Donald Trump can do something or kick Mike Johnson out. Things take a little time, so they probably would be able to do that. I think there's a deadline on Republicans backing out of this. And the Republicans have a tough job because they can back down. I think many of them would want to back down, but they do have to convince Donald Trump to get on board with this. Somebody's got to be able to manipulate him to make him understand why this is a better choice than doubling down. Now, Donald Trump doesn't have anything to lose, so he may be hard to choose. But I think November 1 is the deadline because we know, and it's being promoted or talked about all across the media, November 1, a lot of SNAP payments are going to stop. And that's going to create a lot of angry, hungry, poor people in this country. And it's going to cause a shit show in this country. I mean, there's a lot of things that are people upset about. We've got 7 million people that come out on No King's Day. You shut off those SNAP payments, just because the government shut down and the Republicans are getting the blame for it, that's going to be devastating to the Republican Party. So I think November 1st is probably the deadline.
It probably is. Or at worst, early November, where if it's early enough, third, fifth, something where, um,
Before they
they
get
can
the
still
SNAP
get people
payments.
most of the, they can still get them in and have it not affect most of the month. But
Yeah.
that's going to affect a lot of people. It's going to affect millions nationwide. I read an article said something they were estimating somewhere in the neighborhood of 135,000 people here in Iowa won't get their SNAP payment on November 1. And that's just in Iowa. And Iowa is a relatively small state population wise.
Right.
You're talking millions of people, and the Republicans are going to be the ones to get the blame. You might be right that November 1 could be the deadline for them.
Or, like you say, in and around November 1, because when that I mean, there's plenty of stuff that people are angry about. They're hitting the streets as we speak, but that thing is going to make a lot of angry people. I mean, if you have mothers and fathers and grandparents that can't feed their kids, can't feed themselves, you can do a lot of things to people, but take away their food. You've got people at a point where they've got nothing to lose at that point, and shit is going to go off the rails.
Well, exactly. And then you combine that with the fact that they're cutting a bunch of money in support for food banks, which, a lot of the food banks around here, from knowing people that have needed it from time to time, you weren't getting a lot anyway. You weren't getting to support on end. You were getting a couple of meals at best. Uh, you know, it wasn't a lot of food. They're already going to be taxed. The ones that aren't government funded are going to be taxed even more. And he's cutting back funding to the rest. So
Yeah.
people are going to be desperate if they start losing access to food. And there's only one person to blame or one group to blame, and that's the Republicans at this point.
Well, and there's another factor with the closure and the tariffs and all this stuff. Donald Trump said he was going to bail out the farmers. He said he was going to make sure the military got paid. To the best of your knowledge, have either one of those things happened? Have the farmers gotten bailed out? Have the military gotten paid as yet? I don't think so.
I'm not 100% sure if the military got paid. I saw some things around the 15th that said it sounded like they were able to be successful at moving the money around, but I saw other things saying, well, maybe not. The big thing was if they did move money around to pay the military, it was probably illegal, but the Republicans uh, rightfully saw that Democrats wouldn't challenge it because they didn't want the image of going against the military and making sure they didn't get paid. So they got away with a fast one there.
Well, here's why.
But they haven't
Here's
bailed
why I
out the
don't.
farmers.
No, I haven't bailed out the farmers, and here's why I don't think the military has been paid yet. John Thune wants to pass a bill to cut out paying the military. That hasn't gone through the Senate as yet. Certainly hasn't gone through the House because the House isn't there. John Thune stood up and said, "I dare you to sue us for doing this." Um, but I haven't heard anybody do it. With Donald Trump and all the Republicans, had they paid the military, we would have heard about it. Had they paid, I could be wrong about this, but they're going to crow about it when they said, see, Democrats, we got the military paid. But it's been too quiet. Nobody said that they got paid. And that seems kind of weird to me as far as how the Republicans would normally handle it. You know, if there's somebody in the audience that is in the military, please let us know if you got paid. Because if you didn't, there's going to be a lot of pissed off motherfuckers out there, not only because of the shutdown, but because they were promised to get paid.
Yeah, and the fact is they have this bill coming forward. I saw to make sure that the military gets paid, and they want to pay government employees. Now, the thing I read didn't specify whether that meant including the furloughed employees, so they could maybe come back to work and won't get paid, and then it's just, well, it's a technicality. The government's closed, but the employees are doing their jobs, or are they getting just paid while furloughed so they're not suffering?
Right.
Either one of those two things, uh, it changes how Democrats would view this bill. If it's paying the employees to and they're still furloughed, so the government's not functioning, Democrats might be more on board, because having the government not function and having people stay home, unfortunately, it's a side effect, but it's a bargaining tool for the
Right.
Democrats. They
Right.
can say, hey, the government's doing this and that, and you know, this is where we're at. But if they're all at work and they're getting paid to be there, and it's only a technicality that the government's closed, their position becomes a lot weaker. So it changes how they would vote for this thing. But you're right; it hasn't passed the Senate, hasn't passed the House yet. And if they pass it, it would probably pass the House, because you got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out, and she said something that I agree with. She's sounding like the voice of reason occasionally with the Republican Party. And she said, when it comes to the midterms, that she goes, we could end up losing the House in the midterms if we don't end this government shutdown and do something to make it so Americans aren't living paycheck to paycheck. She goes, when it comes to the election, Americans are going to be looking at it through the lens of their wallet. And if they don't have any money, they're not going to put us back in power.
The only thing I would say to Marjorie Taylor Greene, that's a good point. That's a salient point. But Margie, it's too late, too little too late, because you've got the tariffs, you've got the farmers, you've got all this other shit. If you think the Republicans have any chance of winning the House, you're fucking delusional at this point.
Oh yeah, you're right there. I mean, they've got so many bad things going for them. I don't think they have any chance of winning. But the fact that at least she's out there saying that part, saying, hey, you know what? We're going to cost ourselves the House. Somebody has some forethought here. It's just surprising that it's coming from Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah, anything that's coherent coming out of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Last thing I'm going to ask you, we've got three, we got probably more than three elections, but the elections people have been talking about. First of all, the mayor of New York, Mondami. We're talking about the governor of New Jersey and the governor of Virginia, I think, who Virginia has taken a
Yep.
beating with his shutdown. Um, if those all go decidedly to Democrats. Now, I mean, sure, Jersey, you kind of expect a Democrat to win, and in New York City, you would expect a Democrat to win. But if they go decidedly, does this raise a flag, a red flag for the Republicans? Do they start shitting themselves at that point? I mean, that
I
election's coming up in 2 weeks, so it's imminent.
I think it's really going to depend on what percentages we're talking about here. If it ends up being like Virginia, I know there's the two main candidates. I don't know if there's a third party candidate in Virginia. But if it ends up being something like 49 to 48 with a couple percentage points voting for other, something like that, and it's close, probably not. If the Democrat gets, 55, 57, 60% of the vote, they're going to start to worry. Same with New Jersey. Like you said, you're probably expecting the Democrat to win. But New Jersey's been back and forth. I mean, Chris Christie was
Oh,
governor in New Jersey, and he's a Republican.
right.
So they're probably expecting, yeah, we're going to lose, but it's going to be close. It'll be 52 to 48, something like that. If it ends up being a blowout, they're going to take notice because this is going to be the first election, even though they're state level, that is kind of a referendum on Donald Trump.
Right. So let's hope in a couple of weeks when those elections happen, the Democrats win big and watch the Republicans shit themselves. I'm going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. Eric, thanks for joining us. We went a little longer. You and I could probably go 3 hours, but that would be tiring for you, tiring for us, and I have a feeling tiring for the audience too. So we won't do that. But thank you very much for coming on. Remind folks where they can find you doing your regular videos and your podcast.
Well, you're right. We probably could do a 3 hour show. It'd be fun for me because I enjoy talking to politics and talking to people that are like-minded. But it'd probably be tiring for a lot of people. Now, as far as finding me, you can find all of my regular content over on TikTok and Blue Sky, Analytical Iowan on there. I only post up my TikToks currently on Blue Sky. You can get all of my TikToks and the video version of the Analytical Iowan podcast on YouTube.
Right.
And you can get the audio from everything I am currently doing over on Spotify, Analytical Iowan over on Spotify. At some point, I probably will find a way to add in the video version on Spotify as well. And I keep working on ways to streamline the process and making it easier all the way around.
Yeah. And if you're not following Eric by now, you're either a Republican or you're fucking lazy. So come on, fucking come on. Let's do this. Anyway, Eric, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it immensely. Those of you listening, thanks for taking the time. I hope you have a great day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.